All right, let's dive into a story, but this isn't some dry scientific paper. No, this is something much bigger. It's the foundational myth of humanity's very first great migration. The story of how a small band of people who had absolutely nothing left to lose decided to follow the sun, and in doing so, ended up filling the entire world. So picture this. Tens of thousands of years ago, somewhere in Africa, a small tribe is watching their world die. The land is drying up. The animals they hunt, they're just gone. And day by day, their entire existence is shrinking until they're backed into a corner with a single brutal choice: stay here and starve, or leave and try to live. You know, in the face of a slow collapse, what do you even do? Do you cling to the past, to the land where your ancestors are buried? Or do you embrace a totally radical idea to just abandon everything you've ever known and walk towards the dawn, trusting the one thing that always comes back: the sun? So their journey really began with pure desperation. With no food and a homeland that was literally dying beneath their feet, the tribe was at a breaking point. And the decision they made next, well, it would split them apart forever. The conflict couldn't have been simpler, but it was absolute. On one side, you have the tribal elder. He represents tradition, the past, and he says, "We stay." But then there's this young man, a Khan, who looks at the rising sun and sees something else. Not just light, but a promise, a path. And he says, "We go." It's that timeless battle, isn't it? Holding on versus letting go. Now, this wasn't some grand exodus. It was a tiny splinter group, just 20 people. The young, the outcasts, the orphans, basically the ones with the least to lose and everything to hope for. The journey that would eventually populate an entire planet began with a group small enough to fit around a single campfire. It's kind of mind-blowing. Okay, so deciding to leave, that was just the first step, because ahead of them lay two monumental, what you'd think were impossible obstacles, and these challenges would test the absolute limits of their endurance and their belief in this whole idea. First up, they had to cross a vast, unforgiving desert. And that's a big if they survived that, they would come face to face with something even bigger and scarier: the boundless ocean. These weren't just challenges, they were like filters designed to strip away everything except the raw, unbreakable will to live. The desert was just brutal. I mean, a scorching sun, constant dehydration, even hallucinations. And then a massive sandstorm just descends on them. A Khan's cry, "Run for the shadow of the dunes," was this desperate last-ditch effort for survival. And when the storm finally passed, their small group was even smaller. So after all that, after the desert, they finally reach a cliff and see it, the end of the world, a vast, endless ocean. But Akan, he sees something else. He sees the sun rising from the water. The path didn't end, it just changed. For weeks, they gathered anything they could: logs, vines, animal skins, lashing together these crude rafts to cross the impossible. Can you imagine? In the middle of a stormy strait, getting tossed around by giant waves, the rafts breaking apart. Their resolve was tested one final time. And Akan's command was so simple: aim for the light. They just steered toward that faint glow of dawn and, completely against the odds, washed up on the shores of a new continent, what we now call Arabia. They'd survived. They actually did it. But this new world, with its strange landscapes and, saber-toothed cats, it demanded way more than just endurance. It demanded they change who they fundamentally were. And so they learned to adapt. They left the plains life behind and figured out how to fish the coastlines. They got really good with fire, using it to conquer these new lands. A new generation was born. These were kids who had never even seen the old home. And slowly, the memory of a place faded, and it was replaced by the identity of the journey itself. And this, right here, was the most profound transformation. They were no longer people from a certain land. They became the traveling people. Their entire culture, their stories, it all became about the journey. Home was no longer a spot on a map. Home was the horizon. That first desperate crossing, that was only the beginning. That impulse to follow the sun, it got passed down from parent to child, becoming this epic odyssey that would span thousands and thousands of years. And we're not talking about one lifetime. For over 1,000 generations, the children of these dawnborn just kept going. They followed the Indian coastline, pushed into the dense jungles of Southeast Asia, And eventually, their numbers grew so large they had to split, taking new paths to fill all the empty spaces of the world. And those paths, they led literally everywhere. One branch just kept pushing south, all the way to what we now call Australia. Another went north, into the frozen lands to hunt mammoths, and they eventually crossed the ice bridge into the Americas. And some, they just got really, really good at traveling on the water, becoming the great Polynesian navigators who settled the Pacific Islands. It's just incredible. It all started with this tiny group of outcasts, this one small impulse to seek the place where the sun was born. And that simple, desperate idea had a consequence no one could have ever imagined. Their footsteps, over thousands of years, filled every single corner of the earth. I mean, really think about that for a second. From those original 20 souls who fled a dying land, we now have a global population of 8 billion people. It's a direct, unbroken line from their courage to our modern world. Every single person on this planet today is a descendant of that first crazy journey. Their frontier was the horizon. Ours might look a little different. Maybe it's scientific or technological or even spiritual, but that ancient impulse, that's still in us. So it leaves us with a pretty big question, right? What dawn are we chasing?